And I'm going to start with Mr. Caputo for 6 minutes. Go ahead, Mr. Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Bateman. Thank you, Professor Fung, for being here. Now, Mr. Bateman, you had intimated at the outset of your remarks that you may not be as overly familiar with the situation here, but I want to just elaborate on a few of your principles that you spoke about. Now, you spoke about supply and demand when it comes to foreign interference or disinformation. And also the fact that it is politicians who are most often the sources of misinformation, disinformation. Would you agree as well that politicians actually not only are critical when it comes to what they put out, but also in their function when they are in a security capacity and a capacity of ensuring that disinformation doesn't get out? In other words, politicians, government plays a protective role. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would.
And part of that protective role is that when government sees things going awry, things going sideways, and they see misinformation and disinformation occurring, that government actually has an obligation to act. I take it you'd agree with that as well?
Well, it depends on the nature of the action being contemplated, because some actions can be helpful and others can be counterproductive.
Okay. So what I'm saying is that when misinformation and disinformation are occurring, the government can conceivably do nothing, but to do nothing is to allow this to occur even more. Isn't that right?
To some extent, but typically a lot of information is transmitted through society without the government taking any particular action. In the case of foreign influence activities, there's a lot more the government can do. But whether or not to publicly disclose such activity or take technical measures or diplomatic measures against the country at issue is often a complicated calculation.
Well, it certainly is a complicated calculation, but I think you would agree that shining the light on foreign interference in some way is always the best antidote to address foreign interference, is it not?
It often is. The exception to that principle is that sometimes the foreign actor may anticipate and even desire or benefit from the public disclosure of their operation. For example, if Russia is conducting an influence operation that is publicly exposed, and then that public exposure actually creates a lot more societal anxiety and fear and distrust than the initial influence operation itself, that could be considered a win for Russia. So that's one of the complications that government needs to consider. I
see what you're saying. They're sowing chaos and they're getting their desired results. Now, when it comes to elected officials, generally, I think it's in everybody's best interest to know whether their elected officials, the people that they're putting an X beside when it comes to elections, have been willingly or semi-willingly participating in foreign interference. You'd agree with that?
Yes.
So in such cases, transparency is paramount. If the government is aware that elected officials are participating in foreign interference willingly, the best thing that can be done is to address those things publicly, is it not?
That would require a framework of law and, again, careful consideration. For example, I'm a former U.S. intelligence analyst, and so I'm familiar with the possibility that there could be unverified intelligence information about someone being co-opted or roped into foreign disinformation, but that might not be a legal certainty.
Right. So, sorry, and I don't mean to cut you off, but I'm just going to ask you to operate on the assumption that we have intelligence services in Canada that have verified and they have come to conclusions. And the conclusions are that 11 parliamentarians have, or either wittingly or semi-wittingly, acting with foreign and hostile states. This intelligence has been verified. It went into a report. In that case there, people in Canada are being expected to vote in the next 12 to 13 months, in all likelihood, on these people. Does it not make sense for democracy, for the integrity of the system, and for foreign interference to be stymied at its root, to expose this and shine the light on it. Does that not make a ton of sense?
Without commenting on the Canadian situation, because I don't know the details, I would just say there are situations where an intelligence assessment might fall short of a prosecutable offense, and that would then create a judgment call and a difficult decision. But I'm not familiar with the Canadian specifics.
Well, could there be any worse discord? You know, you talked about the Russia example. Is there anything worse, any worse discord than people questioning whether who they're voting for is compromised by a hostile state?
I do think one of the reasons that public disclosure can be helpful is when the lack of disclosure creates an environment in which selective leaks and rumors are running rampant. We saw this in previous U.S. elections, and that did seem to lead to a policy of greater disclosure, but not universal disclosure. Each disclosure needs to be taken on its own terms.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr.